This interview with Mikey Weinstein. I'm Jimmy Reeder, a blogger and speaker, founder of Imagine, a learning community working for a better world. Mikey Weinstein founded the Military Religious Freedom Foundation in 2006 to restore the obliterated wall separating church and state in the United States Armed Forces. His family has a proud military history, with 6 family members graduating from the United States Air Force Academy. He served 10 years in the JAG Corps, 3 years as White House legal counsel under President Ronald Reagan, once a mainstream conservative Republican. Personal experience with anti-Semitism as a Jewish family and the growing influence of a specific version of Christianity in the military, Mikey took up the battle against far-right radical religious fundamentalists. On the Military Religious Freedom Foundation website, you can find examples of vicious hate mail that he has received over the years as a result of defending the constitutional rights of religion and free speech of men and women in the U.S. military. Mikey Weinstein's interviews, videos, books, and honors are all there on the website. Far too much to name here, but please check it out. You can find the link posted with this interview. I'm honored to have Mikey with us today. So I said a little bit about you. Please tell us more about yourself, your work.
Well, thank you, Jimmy. I'm really happy that Imagine is here. It's another great outlet. Everything we can muster to try to give a message to the other side is important for a plethora of reasons, not the least of which is it's information. And information is inherently better than no information. We are dealing with a country right now that is deeply divided. It's informed by two distinctly different types of news organizations, and I think there's far more horrific, terrible vexation on one side. That would be the conservative side, organizations like One American News, Newsmax, Breitbart, and Fox News. Then you'll see with what's normally referred to as the mainstream media. So I'm a civil rights fighter. I lead a large organization called the Military Religious Freedom Foundation. Our job is, we're not a complex meal like Chateaubriand. We're just a hamburger. You can't use your position of military authority to force your version of your religion, which is generally what's known as dominionist or fundamentalist Christian nationalism, on an otherwise helpless subordinate. We have over 81,000 clients that we've helped throughout all of the Department of Defense, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Space Force, the Coast Guard, and the Department of Homeland Security, and actually all 17 national security agencies. About 95% of our clients are Christians themselves that are being oppressed tyrannically for not being Christian enough. We have over 800 people in this organization, both paid and volunteered. We have volunteer representation on most military installations, even on aircraft carriers and submarines all over the world. Most of our staff try to be sub rosa. They don't want to stand out, but they report to us when something happens. And the clients come to us because of the acronym would be AARP, and not the one you're thinking about, but anonymity, action, results, and protection. We don't reveal our clients' names unless they want that. And we are able to get to the news media with 100% assurance every time, sometimes very quickly. We have our own news outlets when we need to do something. This fight is lonely, dangerous, brutal, and expensive. I'm a public figure. Unfortunately, I lost my anonymity a long time ago. And, if you're a professional athlete or some collegiate athletes, or if you're a Hollywood movie star, being a public figure, I'm sure, can be cool. If you do what I do or what our staff does, again, it's lonely, dangerous, brutal, and expensive. So our job is to protect America and the world from fundamentalist, dominionist Christian nationalism, where all the nuclear weapons are, Jimmy, and where the drones are, and the conventional weapons, which is our probably the technologically most lethal organization ever created by our species, Homo sapiens, which is the United States military. That's it.
Wow. It's very important work. You and I have both been working against this movement long before it was called Christian nationalism.
Oh,
yeah. And it is, as you point out in your writings and work, it is a very specific kind of supposedly Christianity. I've been a Baptist minister for 51 years, and I'm sad and angered by what has happened. Tell us more about how you would describe Christian nationalism in this larger movement.
Some of the most wonderful people that I've ever known are devout Christians. You're seeing some of our German Shepherd security tactical dogs walking behind me here. We never pen them up for anything, but and I know that I never see more people that are more angered or disappointed and furious when they see these particular types of maniac Christians with the quotations, trying to represent themselves. But fundamentalist Christian nationalism basically wants to replace our representative democracy, which is hanging by a thread in this country. Of course, this is an apocryphal day with the Walker-Warnock runoff occurring today as we speak,
Right.
with a theocratic version of basically, it's like Christian fascism or Nazism. They want to basically, there's various versions, but you can look this up, but most Americans do not have any idea what Christian nationalism is. A few months ago, a member of Congress actually on the floor made that very same statement, saying, what fueled the January 6th insurrection, Jimmy, and everybody out there in Jimmy land, was Christian nationalism. And the member of Congress said, look, most of my colleagues here do not even know what that means. But it basically means creating a version. It's very much like The Handmaid's Tale with Margaret Atwood, Gilead, replacing our Constitution with an autocratic, tyrannical, oppressive version of Christianity that is very digital. Which is one, is you accept our view and you can live according to our rules and laws, or zero. You don't accept it, and we're going to make your life miserable. And if not, we're not going to include you in this life. And by the way, after you die, you'll burn eternally in hell, where you can't even, be in a state of shock and get a reprieve from the flames, because we won't allow that. Not our version of Jesus, our brutal, butchered version of Jesus. Most of our clients, most of our staff are Christians. And we have large numbers of chaplains who are clients of ours, most of whom are Christians, who have to keep their head down. Everyone, is afraid to stand out because, you and I have both been to weddings. I'm sure you've officiated many weddings. I've actually officiated two myself. Just one. That's right. I take that back. And tarantulas on wedding cakes. That's the term I use. If you try to stand up for your right not to be oppressed by Christian nationalism in the military. And we all know that tarantulas on wedding cakes don't have a very long half-life. So I first got into this back in the early 2000s. It was the day, February 4th, 2004, was the day that Mel Gibson's wonderful movie came out. I think the name was The Jesus Chainsaw Massacre, or Freddy versus Jesus. Obviously, it was The Passion of the Christ. And at the Air Force Academy, my kids, I had 3 of them there at the time, were under incredible pressure by their cadet and officer chains of command to go see this movie. I saw it. I was one of the first ones to see it. Halfway through, I stood up and screamed in the theater, stop, I'll convert, stop beating that poor guy. I mean, Mel Gibson just went out, he went, full Braveheart on Jesus. And that was the first sense I had that there was something extremely wrong. It was like pulling on a thread on a shirt. The more you pulled it off, the clothing disintegrates. When I began to realize how pervasive this was. So what I wanted to say on Imagine, the episode today, is that what we're facing in today's military is nothing short of a pervasive and pernicious pattern and practice of systemic fundamentalist Christian nationalism everywhere. I know that your wife, Joy, has been a supporter and a correspondent for many years, and Joy sees everything. I know that recently she's one that put us together for this, but this matters because this country is a leader, if not the leader of the world, whether we like it or not. We're supposed to be a shining example of democracy. Our founding constitutional framers went out of their way, I'm not going to make this a history lesson, to cleave a Grand Canyon in Arizona between, church and state, because they'd seen what happened in Europe when most of the tyrannies, Jimmy, that had occurred had been when men of the cloth had been men in political power. They looked at Cromwell in England. They looked at the Salem witch trials. They said, we're not going to do that here. It's bad enough when you see Christian nationalism, which is pervasive in the country now, in school systems, with sewage workers, with the cops, with firefighters and state legislators and legislatures. And my own son is a member of the legislature in the state of Ohio, just won his 3rd term on November 8th. He's faced this all the time as well there in Ohio and in the legislature. But when you're dealing with our military, which is supposed to defend the full panoply of constitutional rights for all of us in America, and indirectly, really, and sometimes more directly than we like to admit, for the world, it's extremely dangerous when we have our system corrupted. And we've seen this literally more blatantly than we could even imagine since 2015, and certainly since January 6th. I wanted to comment on one thing. I don't want to monopolize this, but you're so right. You and your wife and we here at MRFF saw Christian nationalism 2 decades ago. But back then, you couldn't get arrested for trying to say anything about it. Suddenly, we became discovered on January 6th. We knew that, the Proud Boys, Three Percenters, Oath Keepers, all of the others are fueled by Christian nationalism, as is the Christian identity white supremacist movement. Timothy McVeigh, blowing up the federal building in Oklahoma. We know this, but trying to get people that are to understand this it's very difficult, because it's a micron between protesting and fighting against Christian nationalism and people labeling you as hating Jesus. It's not a question. We don't care what anybody's religious faith is at MRFF, the Military Religious Freedom Foundation. We only care about when a member of the military or the intelligence agencies decide that they have it's all we care about is the time, place, and manner in which they believe they have the right to deploy their faith. As soon as we find an out of control Muslim or Jewish person or atheist, agnostic, or secularist, we've had a few in the better part of 20 years, one or two come to mind, but it's almost always 99.99% of the time a fundamentalist Christian nationalist military supervisor or commander that we are fighting against here.
Right. Well, the question I get as people do begin to learn about this is, so what can I do? They learn a little bit, they're scared, they're terrified, they're whatever, angry maybe, and what can I do? So let me give you that question. What do you think people can do to challenge this movement?
The first thing is to grow a pair and to stand up and not be afraid to say what needs to be said. Martin Luther King made the statement that at the end of the day, it's not the words of our it's not the words of our friends, but it's not the words of our enemies. It's the silence of our friends that we remember, and silence is complicity. You have to actually get off your butts and do something. That doesn't mean you've got to walk down Main Street blowing a trumpet, waving a flag, saying, I support democracy and I'm against fundamentalist Christian nationalism. But if you hear something said, if you're in a restaurant, if you're with family or with friends, you need to say something now. I understand the awkwardness. We live in a country where most people are afraid to tell someone to shut up if they're talking in a movie theater. I get that. I understand it. People are cowed into silence. You can't do that anymore. There's just too much at stake. The next thing is to fund organizations. I'm not giving a pitch, but we don't run on chocolate sauce. We're donating to us is a 100% fully tax deductible donation. You can go to militaryreligiousfreedom.org and help us. We're the ones who are fighting. We do require oftentimes bodyguards, and we have to use weapons, and we have a lot of cameras, and we work closely with federal and local law enforcement because we get crapped on, we get threats sometimes on an hourly basis, particularly this time of year when there are so many violations and it's the height of the Christmas season. We don't see a lot of violence associated with Kwanzaa or Hanukkah. So you can fund organizations that are fighting this, but most importantly, stand up yourself and say something. So that people understand that it's not okay to do it. I had a worker in my house a few months ago. He used the N-word. I overheard him using the N-word with someone. I went in and told him that was completely unacceptable. We don't say that here. And got in his face. I understand that, this person was not a bad person inherently. There's probably, there's an old saying that behind every villain is a victim. I'm sure he was not highly educated. He was a good worker, but that's not going to be tolerated. And particularly if you're going to hear someone talking about with the incredible, you can't even call it a spike. It's more of an explosion of anti-Semitism, whether from Kyrie Irving or from obviously from Kanye West, now Ye, Nick Fuentes, or anybody else, and particularly emanating out of the MAGA movement, with the cowardly, ignorant fool Trump himself. It's everywhere. And it has to be stomped out. It has to be spoken about. I was very proud of John Mellencamp, the artist, who a few days ago, while receiving an award, just went on a 1 or 2 minute statement at the podium railing against anti-Semitism. Oftentimes, Jews are viewed as the miner's canary, in the tunnel of peace and security for our people. When Jews start to asphyxiate, Houston, there's a problem. What we fight here at MRFF, Jimmy, is not a problem. It's a national issue or challenge. It's a national security threat internally to this country in magnitude, every bit as much as what we're fighting externally, whether it's Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the Mujahideen, ISIS, or who have you, or what have you. It's a very difficult fight. It isn't a 9-to-5 job. The staff that we have here are fantastic people. Like most civil rights organizations, the large numbers of our volunteers greatly outnumber those who are being paid to do this. And the volunteers are doing it. Many of them, as I said, sub rosa, clandestinely. When we find something like we just did the other day with a nativity scene that at the bottom of it was placed by officers and their wives saying, if you want more Christian fellowship, call this number. I can't tell you where that happened. I can just tell you it was very celebrated, well-known, huge, historically brilliant and celebrated military unit. And we can't, the clients did not feel comfortable revealing that. And that's great. That's the A of AARP, anonymity.
Right.
We know what to do. We know how to do it. We can get to the media. And to answer your question, everyone has a responsibility. Whether you hear someone just whisper something, or say something in your home, at a restaurant, on an airplane, you need to get into people's faces. And if it needs to be more aggressive or militant than that, and it involves our area, which is the military, the intelligence agencies, the Coast Guard, then we will do it for you. And I use the example, I know that you have a beautiful dog, as we do. Most people that have cats or dogs are aware of the Humane Society. Every little village has one, and they're wonderful in supporting animals. They do cookie sales and bake sales, and they're just wonderful. They're on one end of the spectrum of animal rights. On the other end, as my daughter-in-law says, there's PETA. And she says, Dad, that's how I describe MRFF. We are PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, when it comes to the militancy and aggression in fighting to preserve the separation of church and state in the U.S. military. Our typical client is a Protestant. We actually have 24 different varieties of Baptists alone, since you're a Baptist minister, among our clients. I know there's many more denominations than that. But we've had everybody be a client except for a Scientologist. We're still waiting for our first Scientologist. So, but we even have 12 members of the Jedi Church right out of Star Wars. We don't care, again, what your faith is. That isn't the point. But most of the time, the oppressor is a fundamentalist Christian nationalist, and the victim is a Protestant. After that, the next highest level will be a Catholic. Of course, we have hundreds of Jews. I think we represent a little more than 18% of all Muslims. But it is not okay, because Christianity is the majority faith, to impose a version of it that is virulent, that defies most of the descriptions of what we see of Jesus in the synoptic gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and the non-synoptic gospel of John. But if any of your readers want to know how pervasive and pernicious this is, check out the words Jesus rifles. Also check out the words Jesus nukes. I don't have time to explain it, but those are two of our biggest stories.
Wow. So for my last question, just a real brief background, really, for our listeners. I think probably not for you, because you probably already know, but this movement, as it's a modern movement. I mean, Christian nationalism has been around forever, but as a specific modern movement, it's been around for a good 50 years. And they've been learning how to craft a specific narrative that sounds like common sense, because people have heard it over and over and over again on Fox News, on the newer channels, on videos, in their church pulpits often. Yeah. So what they want to do in that narrative is they want people to take back America, as they say, and return to a time when most of the privilege and power in this country belonged to people like them. But of course, a lot of people were always left out of that kind of world. So I think what we need to do is develop an alternative narrative. We need to really be able to, when we speak out, be able to tell a story that will persuade people that there really is a different way to do this, a different way to be a nation than what this movement is trying to get us to do. So how do you do that? How do you talk people? What kind of a story do you tell people?
You're eloquent with your questions, and this makes me think about a meeting I had several years ago with Norman Lear, who's still alive. I think he's 100 years old now. He invited me out to Los Angeles to, I think it's called Stage 3 Productions. Of course, for the people watching this that are old enough, he was the brilliant mind behind Archie Bunker, All in the Family, the Jeffersons, many other shows. And he was interested in what we were doing. And so I went out for several meetings. I remember at the first meeting, he ordered lunch into the office there. We had tuna fish sandwiches, and he looked at me and said, "Hey, Mikey, what did you think of All in the Family?" And I said, "Oh, it started in 1972. I was in high school. So it was an amazing show. It was a real icebreaker. It was, and this is going right to your question: how do you get people? Because it made people think about things in a different way, just like the great TV show Roots, when it came out, made people think about things in a different way. And then he looked at me, he said, "Let me ask you a question. How would you describe Archie Bunker?" You know, the great actor Carroll O'Connor himself, a wonderful progressive liberal person, but of course he played Archie Bunker. And I said, well, he was obviously a bigot and prejudiced man. And he said, he said, well, tell me a little more about that. So I did the best I could and explained who I thought Archie Bunker was. He goes, you know, that wasn't really what I was going for, but that's pretty much what everybody tells me. He said, I just wanted people to know that this was a common American who was afraid of change.
Yeah.
And in answering your excellent query, you and I grew up in America where you didn't see black people on TV, or if they did, they spoke just like white people. You didn't see Jewish people, you didn't see Hispanic people, you didn't see Native American people, unless, of course, they were in stereotypical roles.
Right.
And I think we have got to, America has demographically significantly changed. And I think that the idea of Christian nationalism focuses, which, and let's make it clear, Christian nationalism is nothing more than white supremacy. It's another version of white supremacy. That's what it is. The idea of going back to a white-controlled country and world where straight white Christian males dominated everything is appealing to people if, of course, they are in those categories. What is most troubling is that we can find people that aren't in those categories that still support MAGA. I can't explain that other than the fact that there's always going to be a few that are out there. But I think what Norman Lear said was powerful in that he was trying to, he effectively changed things with that show, even though he wasn't trying to show Archie Bunker, who was still a lovable character, unless he was persecuting you, as a bigot or a prejudiced person, but as someone who just was afraid of change. I'm not running for office. I mentioned my son is a politician. So I'm not trying to get people's votes. I'm trying to stand up and fight for people that can't fight for themselves. And so I commend tremendously what you're doing with this project with Imagine, what your wonderful wife has done for years. I mean, they ought to do a movie or a TV series on the two of you. That would be fascinating. The folks here at MRFF, our staff, our media people, our research people, our administrative people, our personal protection and bodyguards, these are wonderful people. And I think they all understand this. And I'm amazed at the number of extremely devout evangelical Christians who are on our staff, who donate to us and who support us. And I make it clear there's a difference between being an evangelical Christian and being a fundamentalist Christian. We go back to time, place, and manner. If you believe that you have the right to scream fire in a crowded theater, you can be a fundamentalist Christian nationalist. But in this country, we have the Constitution, we have federal case law, and in the military, we have DIR, directives, instructions, and regulations that outlaw this stuff. But if you live someplace where there's an interstate highway where the speed limit is 70 or 75, and people routinely do 125 or 130, and the highway patrol does nothing, what do you think that does for trying to create to get rid of chaos and create an ordered society where everybody can be safe? And what we're basically talking about is, I always say this: when you tell someone that they lack honesty, character, intelligence, and worthiness, and courage because of their religious faith or lack thereof, why, Jimmy, there is no difference between that and telling someone that they're stupid because of the color of their skin or because they were born a female. So that's what we're talking about here. And the force multiplier of the U.S. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Space Force, the intelligence agencies, the Coast Guard, when you mix that with fundamentalist Christian dominionist Christianity, it isn't just toxic, it's deadly. It's not what this country was meant to be in any way, shape, or form. But unless we stand up for it, I mean, we go back to what Thomas Jefferson said, right? He was the rock star of his day. He walked out of the Constitutional Congress in Philadelphia, besieged by all of his fans, going, Dr. Franklin, what type of country have you all bequeathed to us? You probably know where I'm going. His famous statement was, a republic, if you can keep it. Right. So please help Jimmy and myself and the MRFF keep our wonderful republic. And thank you for this opportunity very much.
And I appreciate so much all of your time. We are bringing all of this to a close. Do you have any final thoughts, or was that your final thought?
I think that would be my final thought.
Okay.
As I said before, I know that the people that are watching this that want to help, we've tried to outline, stand up for yourself, donate to organizations that fight this so that you don't have to face all of it. But ultimately, I've always felt you could boil the 10 Commandments down, or the other hundreds that exist in the in the Torah as inherited by the New Testament to just two, which is love each other and help each other. So let's on that note, let's say that if you're going to love each other and help each other, it doesn't say only white, straight, Christian, male others. It's everybody and all organisms. And so that's where I probably like to leave it. And thank you again for the opportunity very, very much.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. Wish you the very best in all your work.
Thank you, Jimmy.